The moment she sat down at the piano on that small, dimly lit stage, time seemed to stand still. Her hands hovered above the keys for a second, trembling slightly, before she finally pressed down. The first note rang out, soft but clear, cutting through the low murmur of the crowd. As the melody unfolded, something shifted, not just in the room, but within her. For the first time in months, she wasn't thinking about bills, work, or anything else weighing her down. All that mattered was the music spilling from her fingertips. She played a piece she had written during one of her darkest days, a tune born out of exhaustion and hopelessness, yet somehow carrying a glimmer of light. It started slow and delicate, like raindrops falling on dry earth, then swelled into something powerful and alive, filling every corner of the cafe. People stopped talking mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Even the barista behind the counter leaned against the wall, captivated. By the end of the performance, the room was so silent you could hear the faint hum of the overhead lights. When she finished, there was a heartbeat of silence before the applause erupted. It wasn't wild or deafening. It was heartfelt, genuine, the kind that made her cheeks flush with both pride and disbelief. She hadn't expected this reaction. To her, it was just another attempt to keep her dream alive, but to everyone else, it felt like magic. Among the audience sat a man who looked different from the rest. He wasn't clapping wildly or chatting excitedly with his neighbor. Instead, he sat perfectly still, his eyes fixed on her as if trying to memorize every detail. When the applause died down and people began returning to their conversations, he approached her. "That was remarkable," he said, his voice calm but filled with conviction. "You have a rare gift." He introduced himself as Adrian, a well-known pianist and composer whose name she vaguely recognized from articles online. He explained that he was in town scouting talent for a new project and happened to stop by the cafe on a whim. Hearing her play, he said, reminded him why he fell in love with music in the first place. Then came the words she never imagined hearing. "I'd like to mentor you." Her knees nearly buckled. Was this real? Was this actually happening? Part of her wanted to pinch herself to make sure she wasn't dreaming. But Adrian's expression was earnest, his offer sincere. He spoke about helping her record an album, teaching her how to refine her craft, and introducing her to opportunities she'd only dreamed of. It sounded too good to be true, but his belief in her gave her courage. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing after that. Balancing her newfound mentorship with her responsibilities at home proved harder than she anticipated. There were mornings when she woke up exhausted, torn between practicing and heading to her part-time job. Nights stretched long as she juggled homework, caring for her father, and writing new pieces under Adrian's guidance. Doubts crept in often. What if she couldn't handle it? What if she failed? But every time she felt overwhelmed, she remembered the faces of those strangers in the cafe that night, the way they had listened so intently. And she remembered Adrian's words, "Your music has the power to move people." That thought kept her going, even when the road ahead seemed impossibly steep. This was more than just her dream now. It was a chance to create something meaningful, something that might touch lives in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Isco Expand Crow without heading 400 words Mayan, simple English words. Part 5. It should be interesting, and every part should be engaging so the audience doesn't get bored. Also keep the wording simple and natural tone. Also make the script human-centric and don't give feel of AI generated. Also don't create violated content, which can affect YouTube policy. Also don't use names like Marcus, Sarah, Emma, Jamal, etc. In a small, quiet town surrounded by lush green hills and thick forests, there lived a young girl with big dreams. Her name wasn't important. What mattered was the way her heart danced whenever she heard music. This little town didn't have much going on. No bright lights or bustling streets, just simple lives tied together by shared routines. But for this girl, life had its own magic, and it all revolved around an old piano that sat in the corner of their modest living room. The piano wasn't anything fancy. Its wooden frame was scratched, and some keys stuck if you pressed too hard. It looked like it had seen better days, but to her, it was perfect. The instrument had been a gift from her grandmother, who used to play it when she was younger. Music is the voice of the soul, her grandmother would say, her eyes twinkling as her fingers glided over the keys. Those words stayed with the girl long after her grandmother passed away, leaving behind only memories and the piano. Every afternoon, after finishing school and helping her mom with chores, she'd sit at the piano and let her fingers explore the keys. At first, the sounds were clumsy, disjointed even. Neighbors might have heard odd notes floating through the air, but she didn't care. There was something about the way the vibrations filled the room, wrapping around her like a warm hug. Each wrong note taught her something new. Each stumble brought her closer to finding her rhythm. And slowly, those random notes began to turn into melodies, soft, hesitant at first, but full of promise. Her family wasn't rich. Money was tight, and luxuries were few. Sometimes, they couldn't afford new textbooks, let alone music lessons. But none of that stopped her. She spent hours teaching herself, watching videos online, and practicing until her fingers ached. Her parents noticed how serious she was getting. They weren't musicians themselves, but they could see how much joy the piano brought her. On nights when the house felt heavy with worries, her playing seemed to lift everyone's spirits, even if just for a moment. One day, while flipping through an old book her grandmother had left behind, she found a handwritten sheet of music tucked inside. It was a short melody, barely half a page long, but felt special. She played it over and over again, imagining her grandmother sitting beside her, guiding her hands. That night, under the soft glow of a bedside lamp, she decided to add her own notes to the melody. What started as a tribute turned into her very first composition, a piece that felt entirely hers. Little did she know, this was just the beginning. The piano wasn't just an object anymore. It was becoming her companion, her teacher, and most importantly, her escape. Every time she sat down to play, the world outside faded away. In those moments, she wasn't just a girl from a small town struggling to make ends meet. She was someone creating beauty out of silence, one note at a time. And deep down, she hoped that someday, her music would do the same for others. Isco Expand Crow without heading 400 words Mayan simple English words. Part 2. It should be interesting, and every part should be engaging so the audience doesn't get bored. Also keep the wording simple and natural tone. Also make the script human-centric and don't give feel of AI-generated. Also don't create violated content, which can affect YouTube policy. Also don't use names like Marcus, Sarah, Emma, Jamal, etc. As the girl grew older, her connection with the piano only deepened. What started as a childhood curiosity had turned into an unshakable passion. By the time she reached her teens, she wasn't just playing songs anymore. She was creating them. One crisp autumn morning, when the sun peeked through her bedroom window and painted golden streaks across the floor, she sat at the piano and let her fingers wander. Something about that sunrise inspired her. The way the light stretched slowly over the horizon felt like hope coming alive. And so, her first original melody was born. It wasn't anything grand. A simple tune, gentle and flowing, like a quiet stream finding its path. But it carried emotion, the kind that made her chest swell with pride when she played it back. Her music teacher, an elderly woman with a warm smile and endless patience, noticed something unique in the composition. "This isn't just notes on paper," she said one day after hearing the piece. "It tells a story. It speaks to people." Those words stuck with her, planting a tiny seed of ambition in her heart. The idea of sharing her music with others began to take root. At first, it felt like a distant dream, something too big for someone from her small town. She'd often sit by the window late at night, staring at the stars and wondering if anyone beyond these hills would ever hear her melodies. Could her music really mean something to people outside her family or her school? The thought both excited and terrified her. Self-doubt whispered loudly in her ear, "Who are you to think your music matters? You're just a girl with an old piano." But then came moments that pushed those doubts aside, like the time her younger brother fell ill, and the house was filled with worry. One evening, while everyone sat quietly lost in their thoughts, she started playing softly. It wasn't a happy song, but it was honest, one that echoed the weight of sadness yet hinted at hope. Her mother looked up from her knitting, tears glistening in her eyes, and gave her a small, grateful smile. In that moment, she realized her music could do more than entertain. It could heal. Her teacher encouraged her to dream bigger. "You have a gift," she said firmly during one of their lessons. "Don't keep it locked away in this room. Let it out into the world." Those words lit a fire inside her. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life where music wasn't just a hobby. It was her purpose. Maybe she could write pieces that inspired others the way her grandmother's stories once inspired her. Maybe she could create something that reminded people they weren't alone, even in their darkest hours. Still, fear lingered. The world beyond her town seemed vast and intimidating. How could someone without fancy training or connections make a mark? Yet, every time she touched the keys, she felt a pull, a quiet certainty that this was what she was meant to do. So, she kept writing, kept practicing, kept believing. Even if the road ahead was uncertain, she knew one thing for sure. Her music mattered to her. And maybe, just maybe, it could matter to someone else too. Isco Expand Crow without heading 400 words in simple English words, part 3. It should be interesting, and every part should be engaging so the audience doesn't get bored. Also keep the wording simple and natural tone. Also make the script human-centric, and don't give feel of AI generated. Also don't create violated content, which can affect YouTube policy. Also don't use names like Marcus, Sarah, Emma, Jamal, etc. Life had a way of testing her resolve, just when she thought she was ready to chase her dreams. When she turned 17, everything changed overnight. Her father, who worked long hours at a factory to provide for the family, fell seriously ill. The medical bills piled up quickly, and suddenly, the weight of responsibility landed heavily on her young shoulders. She had no choice but to take up part-time jobs after school, working a local grocery store, babysitting neighborhood kids, and even cleaning offices late into the night. Her piano, once the center of her world, began collecting dust. There simply wasn't enough time or energy left for it anymore. Between juggling work, school, and helping her mother care for her father, her hands rarely found their way to the keys. Some nights, as she lay in bed exhausted, she'd stare at the ceiling and wonder if her dream of becoming a musician was slipping away forever. The melodies that once flowed so freely now felt distant, like echoes from another life. But even in the hardest moments, music never truly left her. One evening, while working at a small diner on the edge of town, she found herself humming absent-mindedly as she wiped down tables. It was one of her own compositions, a piece she hadn't played in months. At first, she didn't notice the man sitting alone in the corner booth, sipping coffee and watching her intently. He was older, with kind eyes and a guitar case resting beside him. After she finished her shift, he approached her hesitantly. "I couldn't help but overhear what you were humming," he said, his voice warm and encouraging. "It was beautiful. Do you write your own music?" She nodded shyly, caught off guard by the question. They talked for a while, and he introduced himself as a musician who performed at local venues. He told her about an open mic night happening in the city the following week and urged her to participate. "You've got something special," he said earnestly. "Don't let life steal that from you." The idea terrified her. Performing in front of strangers? In a city where no one knew her? It felt impossible. But deep down, she knew this might be her only chance to reconnect with her passion. With trembling hands, she agreed. Over the next few days, she practiced tirelessly, squeezing in moments whenever she could, early mornings before work, late nights after everyone else had gone to sleep. Playing again felt like coming home, even though fear gnawed at her constantly. When the night of the open mic arrived, she stood backstage, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear anything else. She clutched the sheet music tightly, reminding herself why she was there. Not just for herself, but for the little girl who once dreamed of making people feel something through her melodies. As she stepped onto the stage, the spotlight blinding her for a moment, she took a deep breath. This was it. the moment she'd either rise or stumble. Either way, she knew she had to try. Isco expand crow without heading 400 words my in simple English words. Part 4. It should be interesting, and every part should be engaging so the audience doesn't get bored. Also keep the wording simple and natural tone. Also make the script human-centric and don't give feel of AI generated. Also don't create violated content, which can affect YouTube policy. Also don't use names like Marcus, Sarah, Emma, Jamal, etc. With Adrian's guidance, she dove headfirst into creating her first album. It wasn't just about putting together a collection of songs. It was about telling a story, her story. Every melody carried a piece of her life. The struggles, the quiet joys, the moments of hope that kept her going. She poured her heart into each track, spending hours tweaking notes and revisiting old compositions to make them feel alive again. One of the standout pieces was inspired by her grandmother, the woman who had given her the piano all those years ago. She called it Morning Light, a tribute to the countless sunrises her grandmother used to wake up early to watch. The melody began softly, like the first rays of dawn breaking through the darkness, then grew warmer and brighter as it unfolded. Playing it always brought tears to her eyes because it felt like a conversation with someone she missed deeply. Adrian listened intently during one of their sessions and nodded slowly when she finished. "This is special," he said simply. "It's not just music, it's a memory." Recording the album was both exhilarating and exhausting. For the first time, she worked in a professional studio, surrounded by equipment she didn't understand and people whose expertise intimidated her. At first, she second-guessed every decision, worried she wasn't good enough or that her music wouldn't resonate. But Adrian reminded her why they were doing this. "You're not here to impress anyone," he told her firmly. "You're here to share your truth. Let the music speak for itself." As the weeks went on, she began to find her rhythm. Late nights in the studio became meditative rather than stressful. She'd sit at the piano, close her eyes, and let the melodies flow naturally, trusting her instincts instead of overthinking every note. Each session felt like peeling back another layer of herself, revealing parts of her soul she hadn't realized were there. The process was grueling at times. There were days when nothing sounded right, and frustration threatened to overwhelm her, but she learned to push through. Every setback taught her something new. Every challenge made her stronger. Adrian also encouraged her to think beyond herself. "Why do you want to make this album?" he asked her one evening after a long day of recording. She thought about it for a moment before answering. "Because I want people to feel less alone," she said quietly. "I want them to know it's okay to struggle, to cry, to dream big even when things seem impossible." Adrian smiled. "Then let that be your guiding light. Make music that heals, that uplifts, that reminds people they're not alone." By the time the final track was recorded, she felt a mix of emotions, pride, relief, and a tinge of sadness that the journey was coming to an end. The album, which they titled Inspirational Piano Melodies, uplifting music to motivate your day, was more than just a project. It was proof that she had taken the pain and beauty of her life and turned it into something meaningful. As she listened to the finished product for the first time, tears streamed down her face. This wasn't just her music anymore. It belonged to anyone who needed it, and she couldn't wait to share it with the world. Isco expand crow without heading 400 words my in simple English words. Part 6. It should be interesting, and every part should be engaging so the audience doesn't get bored. Also keep the wording simple and natural tone. Also make the script human-centric and don't give feel of AI generated. Also don't create violated content, which can affect YouTube policy. Also don't use names like Marcus, Sarah, Emma, Jamal, etc. The release of Inspirational Piano Melodies, uplifting music to motivate your day, came at a time when the world seemed to need it most. People everywhere were dealing with uncertainty, loss, and change. The news was filled with stories of hardship, and social media buzzed with conversations about how hard it was to stay hopeful. And then, almost like a soft breeze cutting through the chaos, her music began to spread. At first, it started small, A few shares on local community pages, a couple of heartfelt comments from listeners who stumbled across her tracks online. But soon, word of mouth took over. Someone posted a video of themselves studying late at night with her song, Morning Light, playing softly in the background. Another shared how they listened to her music during a long hospital visit, finding comfort in its gentle rhythm. Each story touched her deeply because it reminded her why she had started this journey in the first place, to connect, to heal, to remind people that even in tough times, there's beauty worth holding on to. Her growing popularity led to an invitation for a modest tour. Nothing flashy, just intimate performances in cozy venues where she could see the faces of her audience. These shows became some of the most meaningful experiences of her life. After one performance, a young woman approached her, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Your music saved me," she said quietly. "I was having such a hard time, but your songs made me feel like I wasn't alone." Hearing those words left her speechless. It wasn't fame or recognition she cared about. It was knowing her melodies had reached someone, somewhere, in exactly the way they needed. Between performances, she kept writing. Creativity flowed more freely now that she'd learned to trust herself and embrace vulnerability. She wrote new pieces inspired by the people she met along the way. The single father working 2 jobs to support his kids, the elderly woman who danced slowly to her music despite using a cane, the teenager who told her she wanted to learn piano after hearing her play. Every interaction fueled her desire to keep creating, to keep giving back. Adrian watched her grow with pride, often reminding her not to lose sight of her roots. "Remember where you came from," he'd say. "That authenticity is what makes your music special." So, between tours and recording sessions, she returned home often, sitting at her old piano, surrounded by familiar sights and sounds. Her family marveled at how far she'd come while staying true to herself. Her mother would sit nearby, knitting as she always did, smiling whenever a new melody filled the room. One evening, after a particularly emotional show, she sat alone backstage, staring at her hands. The same hands that once scrubbed tables at a diner and typed essays for school assignments. Now, they created something extraordinary. She realized that success wasn't about awards or numbers. It was about connection. If even one person felt seen or heard because of her music, then every sacrifice, every sleepless night had been worth it. This wasn't just her dream anymore. It belonged to everyone who found solace in her notes. Isco Expand Crow without heading 400 words in simple English words. Part 7. It should be interesting, and every part should be engaging so the audience doesn't get bored. Also keep the wording simple and natural tone. Also make the script human-centric and don't give feel of AI generated. Also don't create violated content, which can affect YouTube policy. Also don't use names like Marcus, Sarah, Emma, Jamal, etc. Years passed, and her music became a beacon of hope for people around the world. What started as a quiet dream in a small town had grown into something far greater than she ever imagined. Her albums topped charts, her concerts sold out within minutes, and her face appeared on magazine covers. But none of that mattered to her, as much as the letters she received every day, notes from strangers sharing how her melodies helped them through heartbreak, illness, or moments of doubt. Each letter was a reminder that her music wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who found strength in its notes. Despite her success, she never forgot where she came from. She often returned to her hometown, driving down familiar roads lined with trees that seemed to whisper stories of her childhood. The old piano still stood in the corner of her family's living room, its keys now polished, but carrying the same soulful scratches. Sitting there felt like coming home, grounding her in the simplicity of her roots. It was here that she wrote some of her most heartfelt pieces, drawing inspiration from the life she once lived and the people who shaped her. Her journey also inspired her to give back in ways she hadn't dreamed of before. She founded a foundation dedicated to bringing music to children who otherwise wouldn't have access to it. Old instruments were donated, refurbished, and sent to schools in need. Scholarships were created for kids eager to learn but held back by financial struggles. She visited classrooms, sitting cross-legged on the floor as she taught young hands how to play their first chords. Watching their faces light up reminded her of herself at that age. The wonder, the excitement, the endless possibilities. One summer, she organized a free outdoor concert in her hometown, inviting local musicians and families to celebrate together. People brought blankets and picnic baskets, filling the park with laughter and chatter. When she took the stage, the crowd erupted into applause, but what moved her most was seeing neighbors she'd known all her life. Teachers, shopkeepers, friends, singing along to her songs. After the show, an elderly man approached her, tears in his eyes. "You've come so far," he said, "but you're still one of us." Those words stayed with her long after the night ended. As the years went on, she continued writing music, but her focus shifted slightly. Instead of chasing fame or perfection, she aimed to create pieces that felt timeless, songs that could comfort someone today and still resonate decades later. Her grandmother's handwritten melody remained tucked inside her piano bench, a cherished reminder of where it all began. On quiet mornings, she'd play it softly, imagining her grandmother sitting beside her, nodding approvingly. Looking back, she realized her story wasn't just about music. It was about resilience, connection, and the power of believing in yourself even when the odds felt impossible. Her journey proved that dreams don't have to be grand to matter. Sometimes the simplest acts, like playing an old piano in a small town, can ripple outward, touching lives in ways you'll never fully understand. And as sunlight streamed through her window one morning, she smiled, knowing her melodies would continue to inspire others long after she was gone.